So it's the big story beyond our borders now. Minister of International Relations Naledi Pandor has described the attacks by Israeli security forces on worshippers at the Aqsa mosque as a violation of international law. Dr. Pandor slammed the actions by the Israeli state as the annexation of Palestinian land, adding that the violence could undermine negotiations for a two-state solution. For more on the diplomatic options that are open to South Africa and other nations who condemned the attacks, let's bring in DIRCO's Deputy Director General Anil Sooklal, who joins us now via our video link. Anil, thanks for your time. Great to chat to you on the AM report. What's happening currently is just what some people have described as an open wound for an ongoing conflict, the type of war that you and I know has affected generations and is unlikely to end anytime soon. I wonder how that should inform any kind of response that South Africa should give at this point.
Well, I think you are correct in your observation, Ayanda. It's very unfortunate. This Saturday, 15th of May, will mark 73 years since the Palestinians were forcibly removed from their homeland and have become stateless. And I think the international community has failed the people of Palestine, that in over 7 decades, the Palestinian people still are without an independent sovereign state. And I think South Africa and the international community must keep up pressure. The Israeli authorities have a moral obligation to enter into negotiations without any preconditions to address comprehensively a lasting peace. You can only have a false peace in Israel as long as the issue of Palestinian statehood and Palestinian sovereignty is not addressed comprehensively. The Palestinian people have a right to an independent, free, democratic Palestinian state. And South Africa fully supports this two-state solution, an independent Palestinian state living in peace side by side with the Israelis, based on the borders that existed on the 4th of June 1967. So we have to continue calling for peace in Israel and Palestine and ensure that the international community keeps this high on the radar and ensure that the Palestinians have freedom and peace. Otherwise, you will not have a lasting, sustainable peace in Israel based on denying the Palestinians their right. What you have seen over the past few days, the excessive use of force by the Israeli security, is nothing new. This has been ongoing for decades. No respect for the right of the lives of Palestinian innocent women and children during this very holy month of Ramadan, when people are busy in worship and prayer. You have gross violation of the rights of the Palestinians in the manner in which they have been treated. And we have seen the violence spreading. Yeah. Yesterday, the violence spread to Gaza. You had airstrikes, and according to the Gaza authorities, over 21 innocent Palestinian lives were lost as a result of the excessive force used by the Israeli security forces.
You know, Anil, I want to place this story for South Africans who feel that it's a bit of a distant away from their lived experience. We've seen the US, the UK, the EU all speaking out. We've heard now that the UN Security Council is holding emergency meetings with other world leaders. Where do we place the South African voice on that platform?
South Africa has been a strong supporter of the cause of Palestinians, even before our democracy. We stood side by side with the Palestinians, and they stood with us to win our freedom. And I think President Mandela captured very well the feelings of all South Africans at the dawn of our democracy when he stated that as long as the Palestinians are not free, South Africa can never be fully free. So we stand with the people of Palestine, and I think what is needed now is more than all of the major countries, including the developing world, calling for a return to negotiations. We need concrete actions, more than just words. As I've said, the United Nations and all of the major players, the quartet included, must do more to bring Israel back to the negotiating table without any preconditions and not undermine the legitimate cause of the Palestinian people for their own independent sovereign state.
Yeah. What does that look like materially speaking? I mean, we've seen other world leaders also speaking out. Really, their sentiments are quite closely mirrored to what you've just expressed to us now. But speak to me a bit more about what that material action actually looks like especially for people on the ground who are quite literally losing their lives as the day goes by?
Well, I think for the past 7 years, the peace negotiations have been stalled. Since the Kerry initiative under the Obama administration failed in 2014, you had the initiative of former President Trump, the deal of the century, which was an absolute farce because it didn't include the Palestinians. I think the quartet, which is made up of the EU, the UN, Russia, and the USA, who have been at the forefront together with the Arab League and the Arab countries, need to call upon the Israelis to return to the negotiating table. I think that's the only way forward, to return to face-to-face talks between the Palestinian leadership and the Israeli authorities, supported by the United Nations and the major international players. This has to happen as a matter of urgency, or you will have this continuing vicious cycle of the wanton loss of lives of innocent Palestinians at the hands of the Israeli security forces that constantly use undue pressure on the Palestinian people.
Sure. The minister has spoken on various platforms about the situation that's currently unfolding in Jerusalem. In fact, one of those remarks was during a virtual event commemorating the UN's declaration of granting of the independence to colonial countries and peoples. It's also known as the Declaration on Decolonization, adapted through the UN General Assembly itself. I mean, what significance do events like those actually hold, given, again, how long-standing the conflict has been and continues to be post such events?
Well, I think it's unfortunate that such resolutions, including the numerous United Nations Security Council resolutions that are totally ignored by the Israeli government. And the international community allows this. I think there needs to be a greater pressure from the international community to hold Israel accountable to all of the United Nations resolutions, to respect international law, including international human rights and humanitarian law, which Israel totally ignores. And we as the international community allows this to go on. And this has to come to a stop. Israel has to be accountable to the United Nations and the international community and held accountable to the resolutions that are passed by the Security Council. Otherwise, it makes a complete mockery of having these resolutions.
Yeah. You know, we've just spoken to someone who, dare I say, appears to be sensitive to the interests of the Israeli people. A lot of what he was trying to put across, the picture he was painting, is that Israel is also interested in living side by side with Palestinians, and, you know, they have an interest in ensuring that there is a sustained sense of peace. To unsuspecting eyes, it appears both ends of this conflict, if you like, are calling for the same thing. But for whatever reason, we aren't getting there. Why is that?
I think that is because of the current Israeli regime. There are a number of Israeli citizens, I would like to believe the overwhelming majority, that wants peace, that wants to live side by side in peace with the Palestinian brothers and sisters. Likewise, the Palestinians would want to live side by side with the Israelis, having their own state. That has to be addressed. You cannot get away from the root cause of this problem. The denial of statehood to the Palestinian people has to be addressed. And the people of Israel must put pressure on the government, because they can only be peace and live in peace with the Palestinians if the issue of Palestinian statehood is comprehensively addressed under the auspices of the United Nations.
Sure. Well, let's watch and see how it all unfolds. Thanks very much for your take on this incredibly worrying story, one, like I mentioned, that's been ongoing now for years. Anil Sooklal is the Deputy Director General of the International Relations Department in South Africa, otherwise known as DIRCO. Anil, thanks very much indeed once again.